the gospel of peace. I've done love, I've done joy, I'm going to do peace. I can't stop thinking about the fruits of the Spirit because it's the most misinterpreted. Or it's more so that people define the fruits of the Spirit, and the Beatitudes especially, with their own vain imagination. And the amount of warnings in prophecy there are against people doing that, it's ridiculous. So because you define the word of God with your own vain imagination, like the words peace and love and things like that, and not the word of God, tribulation is coming because you're teaching the peace of God inaccurately. You're teaching the love of God inaccurately. The love of God is that you keep his commandments. The peace of God is very similar to that. And it's important because the Messiah says, blessed are the peacemakers. Peacemakers make peace with others by preaching the gospel of peace. So we're about to define the gospel of peace. So we're going to start in Romans 3. It says, destruction and misery are in their ways, the way of peace they know not. Remember, a colon is an equal sign, so it's defining. It's like adding on to the definition of this phrase. That's how you get an idiom. And when that's defined once, it's defined forever. That's how the Bible's written. That's how God preserved his idioms. That's what Isaiah 28 means, meaning that he's going to teach his people knowledge through the Spirit of truth, line upon line, here a little, there a little, in these idioms that are preserved. So when God defines something once, you define whenever you see that phrase again, you define it in the same way. You don't use your vain imagination, you use the word of God to interpret itself. So destruction and misery are in their ways, colon, equals, we'll say. The way of peace they know not, equals. Destruction and misery are in their ways, the way of peace they know not. There is no fear of God before their eyes. So, the path of destruction, not knowing the way of peace, and not having the fear of God equals the same thing. The fear of God is defined in Deuteronomy 5, 7, and 8, I think it is, or around there, because the love of God is defined from Deuteronomy 4 to 8, and you're going to get the fear of God in there as well, because they all mean the same thing, funnily enough. So you're going to see that the fear of God means that you keep his commandments. So specifically in Deuteronomy 5, you're going to see that the everlasting covenant that God made with Israel was at Horeb. And when you get to, it's going to list the 10 commandments. That's the covenant that God wrote with his own finger on two tablets of stone. It's everlasting. It was an everlasting covenant. It is an everlasting covenant, which means it still stands. And the Messiah refreshed that. That's what he came to teach. So, the 10 commandments were given. And then you get to Deuteronomy 5 verse 22. And it says, and nothing more was added. He added no more to the 10 commandments. So what's Paul talking about in Galatians 3? The law that was added because of transgression, we don't serve that anymore. That's the sacrificial law that was added. So that's what is meant by the Messiah refreshed the covenant made at Horeb. He refreshed it and he remembered it by ending the sacrificial law that was added. We don't have to keep the sacrificial law for righteousness. We keep the righteousness of God, which is the 10 commandments. So Deuteronomy 5 defines these commandments as being the 10 commandments, not the law that was added. That's why Paul tells us we don't go to the letter of the law. We don't serve that law anymore. So there you go. The fear of God is that you keep the commandments given at Horeb, not Sinai, when the law was added. So people get tripped up on the word law as well. Understandable. You have to understand the difference between covenant and the sacrificial law. Law, meaning Torah, can just mean instruction. So the 10 commandments is a law. But that's not the law that is being referred to in the New Testament in the negative sense, where it's saying we don't do that anymore. The law being referenced there is the sacrificial law. But the 10 commandments is a Torah, it's an instruction. But when you listen to the full instruction, in the full Torah, the full law, you realize, oh, we don't serve this part of the law because it was added. That's the added part. It was added to the covenant. But everlasting covenants are everlasting. They're just that. But the sacrificial law was temporary. And that's why you'll see in Deuteronomy 31, it says, until it is finished. It was to be kept by Israel until it is finished. What does that mean? The Messiah ending it on the cross. He took the sacrificial law upon himself so that we could enter into covenant. Because when you keep the covenant given at Horeb, God can dwell with you and you receive the Spirit of truth. That's Acts 5:32 and John 14 and 15. So, the fear of God is that you keep the covenant made at Horeb. That's why in Acts 3 they say, go and learn what Moses said about the Messiah. You go and do that in Deuteronomy 18. It says that the Messiah is going to come and teach everything that Israel desired at Horeb. Not what was added at Sinai. Two different places. Horeb and Sinai are not the same. So, Romans 3, just the way of destruction is not keeping the covenant made at Horeb. That's not having the fear of God. So the way of peace is the covenant made at Horeb. That's how you define that. And in Romans 3, Paul's quoting Isaiah 59. And this is where it gets really interesting because, again, you can define the fear of God with Ecclesiastes 12, and you'll hear this in the Torah movement because the Torah movement do exactly the opposite to what I've just done. They hear, keep the commandments, and they throw the front of the book at the wall and see what sticks. So they go to the letter of the law because they don't have faith in the Deuteronomy 18 Messiah that was going to come and refresh the Holy Covenant. So they go to the letter of the law. And it's like the Acts 15 scenario playing out. So they say that, the full duty is that we keep the commandments. But the Messiah says, don't say that that's the full duty. Because he elevated the law, which is loving God and neighbour. You have to teach peace. If you keep peace truly, you will teach peace because that's the Spirit of God doing it to you. So in Isaiah 59, Isaiah actually says, Paul doesn't misquote him. He uses the same idiom, but it's a different wording. And that's how the Bible's written. That's how you know that the Bible's written in idioms. So Paul switches out. So wait, Isaiah says, destruction and misery are in their ways. There is no judgment in their goings. So Paul in Romans 3 switches out no judgment in their goings for the fear of God. Therefore, the fear of God equals executing judgment. So the gospel of peace, the way of peace, is keeping and teaching the covenant made at Horeb. Executing judgment according to that covenant. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are they who keep and teach the covenant made at Horeb. That's how you define the Bible. So stop defining peace the way that the Eastern religions do, the way that John Lennon did. This isn't Beatlemania. It's like, because you define things with your vain imagination, the elect rises up and preaches peace, which is the gospel of the Ten Commandments. They're sharply rebuking fables that lie and say we don't need to keep the Ten Commandments. They get sharp against liars like that. And then the liars look at the peacemakers and say, they don't sound very peaceful. Or I don't feel very peaceful right now. You've just stolen my chi. And then they accuse the peacemakers of not having peace. When the reason they're even angry at the peacemakers is because they're preaching the Ten Commandments, which is the gospel of peace. Ironic.